This presentation will focus on how collaboration, proven technologies and government incentives can help scale up climate action. To begin, I will highlight a key current climate trend, Canada's track record over the last few decades and a UN statement on the need for substantial climate action. As shown in the graph on the left, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere are rising at increasing rate. The graph on the right is showing the amount of CO2 emissions in billions of tons per year estimated by the Global Carbon Project. The latest year shown in this graph is indicating that approximately 38 billion tons of CO2 were emitted globally in 2023. Since the amount of CO2 emissions are continuing to increase, it appears that total energy demand is rising faster than renewable energy generation. As shown in this graph, which was prepared by the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development for the Canadian Parliament, Canada has failed to meet its commitments to reduce its emissions over the last 33 years. The red lines in this graph connect dates of Canada's international agreements to the emission targets of these agreements. The green line illustrates the actual emissions. As you can see from this track record, substantially more climate action is needed in Canada. As a result, much greater climate action is required, which is summed up by the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, who said, "Our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once." There are many entrepreneurs creating innovative technologies and trying to commercialize them, but this often takes many years before they can implement on scale. Instead, there should be more focus on scaling up proven technologies. Therefore, we recommend people take the time to learn about the many proven technologies that are now available for scale-up. To facilitate this process, work with others to develop a plan to implement a series of increasing larger projects to make an impact. Collaboration between people and companies with complementary skill sets can make a significant impact. For example, shown here are some possible collaborative projects, starting with a relatively simple one, which is agri-voltaics, that would include combining solar panels, energy storage and farming. Next is combining wind and solar farms with energy storage and geologic hydrogen to produce reliable electricity. Lastly, combining a biomass power plant with solar and wind farms and energy storage to produce biochar, reliable power and methanol. Shown here is an example of collaboration between a farmer, businessperson and engineer. To get started, a farmer offers to provide land for a project to combine sheep farming with solar panels and energy storage. Then an engineer researches options and proposes a scope of the project. Once the scope of project is determined, a businessperson obtains quotations for equipment and estimates the total costs and revenues. Then the farmer, engineer and businessperson work together to apply for funding to implement the project. Once funded, the engineer supervises the implementation of this project. If a project developer does not have sufficient resources to implement a selected project, it can reduce its costs and risks by collaborating with other organizations to implement it. For example, to combine wind and solar farms with energy storage and geologic hydrogen to produce reliable electricity, interested companies could work together to develop a plan for the project and then enter into a joint venture to implement it. Any needed expertise that is not part of the joint venture would be retained by this venture. Potential partners of the lead project developer could include the following companies: wind turbine, solar panel and energy storage equipment installers, an engineering consultant with experience in geologic hydrogen, a drilling contractor with experience in natural gas and/or hydrogen, a hydrogen-powered electricity generator equipment supplier, and finally, a consultant with expertise in tax credits and other financial incentives. This is an example of how more complex projects can benefit from collaboration between specialized companies with complementary expertise. Shown here is a schematic of a facility mentioned in the previous slide. It combines wind and solar farms with energy storage and a generator running on geologic hydrogen to produce reliable electricity. Geologic hydrogen is a key component of the facility since it can provide needed energy when there is very little wind or solar energy available for several days. Shown here is a schematic of the third example project, which is a facility that generates reliable power while creating renewable fuel at the same time. This is accomplished by combining a biomass power plant with renewable energy farms, energy storage and methanol production facility. By combining these technologies in this way, companies can significantly lower their costs and provide reliable power to their customers. This methanol production system is very useful in this regard since the power it consumes can be reduced if needed. For example, If the generated renewable energy substantially declines for a few days and there is no longer enough stored energy available, power to the methanol production system can be reduced or stopped. Implementing a project that produces renewable methanol is very timely since the demand for this renewable fuel is growing very quickly. For example, according to BIS research, the global renewable methanol market is projected to reach $3 billion by 2031 from $0.12 billion a decade earlier, which is a compounding annual growth rate of in the range of 40%. There are many organizations across Canada that could use their expertise and resources to facilitate collaboration in the private sector. For example, business accelerators could expand their focus to help existing companies to scale up climate action instead of just focusing on assisting startups. As well, universities can utilize their wide range of expertise to help companies evaluate technologies, apply for funding, and facilitate the implementation of these technologies. It should be noted that since it takes considerable time and money to get a project funded and implemented, often people and/or organizations helping project developers need to initially invest their time before being compensated. Many universities have institutes that can become valuable partners in a project. For example, the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Energy, or WISE, at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, has over 100 experts from different disciplines including engineering, environment, science, health, math, and arts. They work closely with utilities, private sector partners, government, and nonprofits. Therefore, if you are seeking additional expertise to complement your existing team, you may want to reach out to them or to a similar group at a university near you. There are many pathways to obtain funding for a project. Shown here is one example pathway. First, review the wide range of proven technologies and funding options for a viable project and then select your best option. Then determine prices that can be obtained for long-term offtake of products produced by the project. If the expected revenues appear to be sufficient to make the project viable, develop a sustainable project plan that can attract investment. Then apply for incentive funding from governments. Once incentive funding has been obtained, apply for any needed loans and if needed, invite investors to invest in this project. Once sufficient funding has been secured, implement the project. It should be noted that since considerable funding is available for Indigenous organizations, companies may want to consider collaborating with one or more of these organizations to develop and implement projects. Along with established technologies, there are many relatively new technologies that are now being commercialized, which can be utilized by project developers to generate significant profits. Shown here are two examples. First is a sodium-ion battery for large-scale energy storage, and second are perovskite solar panels, which are relatively low cost. To provide you with an idea of the many technologies that are now in the process of commercialization, the next two slides show links to lists of investments by billionaires and notable investment funds. You can access these links by visiting a webpage mentioned at the end of this video. Shown here are links to lists of investments by billionaires with a focus on climate solutions. First is Jeremy Grantham's list of his favorite investments. Next is Chris Sacca's list of his selected investments, and finally, is a list of investments by Breakthrough Energy, which was launched by Bill Gates. In addition to billionaires investing in new technologies for climate action, there are several investment funds doing the same. Shown here are links to their investment portfolios. Starting with Climate Innovation Capital Portfolio, then Arcturn Ventures Portfolio, the Rise Fund Portfolio, Cycle Capital Portfolio, and finally the Eco Fuel Portfolio. The lists of investments in technologies shown in the previous two slides is only a small part of all the many technologies available. Since it is too much for one person to review all the available technologies for climate action, it is useful to collaborate with others to decide on your best options. These others could include companies and consultants with relevant experience, academic staff from universities, and staff from industry associations. There are many financial incentives available to help fund a climate action project. Shown here are links to web pages with funding options, starting with the federal government's Clean Growth Hub. Next is a web page showing grants and funding from the Government of Canada, as well as a link to the Federal Ministry of Environment and Climate Change's funding programs. Then there is a link to considerable tax credits allocated for carbon capture, utilization, and storage by the federal government. Finally, here is a link to funding opportunities for climate change adaptation by ClimateSAN. There are also funding options available to implement projects with Indigenous organizations. To provide you with an idea of range of funding options available, shown here are some links to web pages with funding options for Indigenous organizations. First is Indigenous climate and environmental funding. Next is funding programs, services, initiatives for Indigenous and Northern communities and organizations. Next is a link to programs that support Indigenous entrepreneurs and business owners in Canada, and finally, is a link to Ontario funding for Indigenous economic development. In conclusion, based on rising global carbon dioxide levels, the total energy demand appears to be rising faster than renewable energy generation, which is creating an urgent need to accelerate generation of clean energy. As a result, there needs to be a shift to implementing climate action technologies on a large scale. One way to help this process is to increase collaboration to scale up proven climate action technologies. There are many organizations that can help facilitate collaboration, including business accelerators and technology centers at universities. Finally, there are many funding programs and tax credits available to help fund climate action projects. Interested individuals and/or companies should investigate proven technologies that they can scale up in a profitable way. These individuals and/or companies should then explore options to collaborate with others, including business accelerators. Once a technology or a set of technologies have been selected to utilize for a project, they should explore funding options, including government incentives. We recommend you consider applying to collaborate on projects with the Climate Solutions Advancement Network, or ClimateSAN. Currently, ClimateSAN is seeking engineers, business graduates with a technical background, and proposal writers. As the UN Secretary General has said, our world should take climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. Thank you for taking the time to view this video. If you are interested in more detailed information about scaling up climate action through collaboration, proven technologies and government incentives, including links to web pages mentioned in this video, please visit climatesan.org/SCAC.